Okay, so for lesson two, we're going to be looking at forests and their resources. So as we're looking at this, and let's look at our everyday phenomenon question that we have for lesson two. So is there a balance between the ecological and economic value of a forest resources? So what is the importance of maintaining the habitat compared to harvesting that for economic value? So we're going to list some ecological and economic values of a forest resource, describe the cost and benefits of the different methods of timber harvest, and discuss the current levels of deforestation in the United States as well as developing countries. So forests cover about 31% of our land in this world, and forests provide us with numerous things. So they provide us with habitat for wildlife or for organisms as a whole. They help to maintain soil, air, and water quality. So again, they do so much important things. They play a key role in our planet's biogeochemical cycles. Okay, the water cycle, the carbon cycle. It is very, very important in order to maintain these forests, especially when we're looking at the big picture. Number four is they provide people with wood for fuel to burn, construction, paper products, as well as other uses. So the people who are in charge of managing and maintaining those are foresters. So foresters that we have are resource managers. So these resource managers are the ones who manage not only public or private forests. So again, these foresters are an important and they aim to balance the ecological importance of forests with the economic importance of forests as a resource for wood products. Now, when foresters are doing this job, they are doing forestry. And forestry is the act of forest management. So this forest management is done by foresters. So the complexity of forests make their resources enormously important, both within their ecosystem and in the world economy. So first of all, 1/3 of our forests are used for timber. Okay, they're used for conservation of biodiversity, protection of soil and water quality, maintenance of biogeochemical cycles, food, medicine, social services like recreation, tourism, education, and the conservation of culturally important sites. Our forests provide us with so much that we have. So if you look at this Earth's resource, all of the green that you see are forests in this world. And about 31% of the Earth's land area is covered within forests as indicated by that green area. Now, most of Earth's forests are boreal forests in the north. So this would be our boreal forest. And what that really means is just that it is a pine tree dominant forest, or they are tropical rainforest. So these two right here would be our tropical rainforest. So the bulk, as well as this over here, would also be tropical rainforest. So the bulk of the forests that we have are either boreal forest in the north. This would also be a boreal forest up here, okay, as well as tropical rainforest near the equator. Now, because forests are structurally complex, they provide many different habitats. So they provide us with many different habitats for plants as well as animals. So forest ecosystems, they have a very high biodiversity or a different number of organisms in that particular area. Okay. Now, forests also provide many vital ecosystem services. So first of all, a good mature forest prevents soil erosion. It prevents that soil from washing away, holds it in place so that it can be used for a long period of time. Forests also do a good job to regulate the water cycle. So they regulate the water cycle by slowing runoff, reducing flooding, even purifying water in that. Again, it's regulating. Again, we're slowing runoff, reduce flooding, and purifying water. Again, these are important ecological features that we have. Three, they're really good at storing carbon and releasing our oxygen. So forests are one of our best fighters against climate change. And finally, they help to moderate the climate. Trees, when they go through transpiration or releasing water vapor, actually can seed clouds and make it rain, and also keep the climate cooler in that particular area. So if we look at the structure that we have of a forest, we start at the top, and the topmost layer is called the canopy. Now, in the canopy, we have some animals that live in the dense treetop canopy, such as leaf-eating insects, and they provide food for many of the bird species that we have. Going down a little bit, we go to the subcanopy. Now, in the subcanopy, we have tree-dwelling mammals such as squirrels, sloths, monkeys that eat fruit, leaves in the canopy and the subcanopy, as well as other animals that use the tree bark, the branches, the trunks as a place to feed, nest, or even rest. Going down even further, we have these broken off branches that kind of the tops break off. That's called the snag. So these are dead or dying trees. So these dead or dying trees are really important to insects, and the insects will feed on the snags and then provide food for other animals. Holes in the snags provide nesting sites and shelter for many of these vertebrate species. Continuing down after the snag, we have the understory. So the understory are plants such as rhododendrons, ground cover plants, ferns that provide varied habitats. The stems, the leaves, and the roots also provide a food source for some animals. And then finally, all the way at the bottom, we have the forest floor. So at the forest floor, much of the biodiversity is found on the forest floor, like mostly as insects as well as decomposers of dead material. So we also have a very big economic and medicine value for these forests. Now, the use of forest resources is essential to our lifestyle. First of all, they provide timber. That timber is a high economic value. It's used in thousands of products, all the way from toilet paper to the building products that we have in our houses. Okay, we also are used for the fuel for warmth and cooking. So again, fuel for warmth, fuel for cooking. Okay, then we also use these to build houses and ships. Obviously, not most of our big ships are no longer made of wood, but a lot of smaller vessels are still wood based, and also paper products. So it's used to make paper in the society. Now, again, these provide a huge economic value. Now, forest plants also provide food and medicine. So the food part of things, right? These forests provide fruits, they provide nuts, spices, and herbs that come from forest plants. Now, medicine wise, forests, they yield many of the modern medicine compounds that we have. So again, we're looking at these structures of economic as well as medical value. So when we're looking at timber harvesting, when we are commercially timber harvesting in a forest, we call it logging. So logging is the commercial practice. Now, this takes place in Canada, Russia, and other nations with very large boreal forests. So these boreal forests are pine trees, sometimes called conifer forests. Now, they also occur in nations with very large tropical rainforests. So these are the two locations where logging is a very big market. Now, in the United States, most logging actually takes place in a conifer forest of the West and on the pine plantations of the South on both private and public land. Now, when timber companies harvest trees, they use the following methods. They use clear cutting, which is the removal of all of the trees from a particular area. Okay. We also use a technique that is called the shelter wood, where you leave a few trees to reseed the area, or you use a selection system where you're only selecting mature trees or trees of interest. Now, these methods then fall into two categories: even age stands or uneven age stands. So, an even age stands results from the regrowth of trees all at the same time. So, since all the trees were cut at the same time, they are all going to be the same size within the forest. So, an example of a method that's going to be even age is clear cutting. So, if you walk through a forest and you notice all the trees are the exact same size, most likely that patch was clear cut sometime in its life, meaning all the trees are going to grow back at the same rate. Now, uneven age stands, they result from the regrowth of trees that were cut at different times. So in other words, you walk through the forest and there is much more diversity, some big trees, some small trees. This is the result of a selection system where you're only selecting certain trees from the area. Now, this uneven stand is going to create much more biodiversity and sustain much more biodiversity because the age of the trees are diverse. So if you kind of look here, this is the result of a clear cut that has led to an even age distribution. So during clear cutting, all the mature trees in the area are cut at once. The result is regrowth that is even aged, like short trees in the foreground. Now, all methods of logging disturb forest communities in some way. Okay, so first of all, when you do logging, it changes forest structure and composition. Right? So again, it also is going to increase soil erosion because the roots are no longer going to be holding that soil into place. And that dirt is going to wash away. And again, the water is going to run faster over the landscape and it's not going to soak in. So it's going to increase runoff. So again, these, regardless of what technique you use, there is going to be some sort of disturbance in that particular area. So clear cutting, let's talk about that a little closer. Clear cutting is a method in which all of the trees in an area are cut at once. So this is the most cost efficient method. This is going to be the easiest to do because you just go and cut everything. So timber companies like to clear cut because you can get the most bang for your buck, but also has the greatest impact on forest ecosystem because you're completely eliminating the trees from an area. Now, the result of a clear cut uh, is an even aged stand. And again, the regrowth is all at the same time. All the trees are the same. So this mimics the effect of a natural disaster. So, if you remember from biology class, this would be like secondary succession. So think of it like a forest fire comes through, a hurricane or a tornado comes through and knocks all the trees over. The soil's still there, but all of them regrow at the same time. So the next logging practice we have is seed tree or shelter wood approach. Now, in a seed tree approach, we have small numbers of mature trees that are left. Okay. And these are healthy seed producing trees. So we leave a few mature seed producing trees that are left to stand so they can reseed the logged area. So again, they're going to reseed that logged area. And again, they're going to regrow. Now, a shelter wood approach is when a small number of mature trees are left in place to provide shelter for the regrowth or the seedlings. In other words, they're almost like a windbreak and they provide the habitat for them to grow. But both are less harmful to forest communities than clear cutting, and both lead to regrowth that is mostly even aged. Because it's not like we're leaving that many of the mature trees, so most of the trees left behind are the same size. So when we go to our last one, which is the selection system, only some of the trees in the forest are cut. And these ones that are cut are usually the highest economic value, and they're all cut kind of at once. Now, when we have a single tree selection, the trees are spaced widely apart. And they are cut at once, or I should say not once. They're cut one at a time. Okay. Now, group selection is in which small patches of trees are cut. A lot of time, our state game lands and state forests, they take this approach. They just do a narrow strip that they log out to keep kind of the habitat intact. Now, there are some disadvantages. So moving trucks and machinery over roads and trails to get individual trees, um, what this does is compacts the soil and makes it difficult for things to grow, as well as it disturbs the forest floor. Now, this is much more expensive than clear cutting and is much more dangerous because cutting is mostly done by hand. So if we take a look at the three approaches here, here's our original forest that we have, right? Here's our original forest. And as we go through the harvest, we either clear cut, we produce a seed tree or a shelterwood approach, or a selection system. So as you can see, when we clear cut, all the regrowth is at the same time, right? Even with a seed or shelter wood, we have one large tree, but the rest of the trees are all the same size during that time. Now, in a selection system, we have a mix of mature and young trees that kind of work our way through. So it kind of is a little less impactful in terms of disturbance. So take a moment to revisit our investigative phenomena. Why is it important to manage Earth's resources sustainably? So take a moment and write a response to the perspective. Develop a few questions a timber company might execute or executive might consider when determining what method of harvest to use in a particular area. So pause the video, write your response there, and when you're done, replay the video and we'll continue. Now, one of the problems with harvesting could be deforestation. And people have cut forests for timber for thousands of years. And forests are also cleared to make way for farmland. So this is pretty much what's called deforestation, which is the clearing of a forest and the replacement of it by another land use. This could be farmland, this could be housing. Either way, we're taking the forest away completely and not allowing it to regrow. So there are some negative effects of deforestation. Okay. So again, we have the potential of the loss of biodiversity. We also are going to lose or have a loss of soil productivity. Okay. It's going to add CO2 to the atmosphere. And finally, it's going to lead to global warming. Again, all of that carbon is now released into the environment. So if you look at the United States, deforestation for timber and farmland enabled the United States to expand across the continent. So we had vast deciduous forests of the East that were virtually stripped of their trees by 1850, making way for countless small farms. But remember, timber from the U.S. built the cities of our country. Countries like New York, or cities like New York City, Chicago, you know, even Wisconsin, Michigan. These were all built by these vast forests that allowed us to expand from coast to coast. So as the U.S. farming economy shifted to an industrial run, wood was used to fuel the Industrial Revolution. Logging operations moved south then west, cutting the continent's biggest trees in the Rocky Mountains, the Sierra Nevadas, the Cascade Mountains, and the Pacific Coast Range. So we had very little old growth forests that are left, and these are forests that has never been logged. So we have very little of these that remain in the US. Okay, so if we take a look at this picture, in 1662, when Europeans began colonizing the area that would become the United States, the entire eastern half and large parts of the western half were forested. Okay, by 1920, the vast majority of the forest had been cut. So you can see how much old growth we had and what we are left with within 200 years, 300 years. Again, these were all logged, they were all used, very little of them remain. So the scarcity of old growth trees in North America today explains the concern that scientists have for old growth ecosystems. So once an old growth forest is cut, so once we cut that old growth that has never been done before, it may need hundreds of years in order to recover. And again, this is undisturbed time, not just disturbed time. So again, this is why what we have left is so important to maintain and kind of protect for the long haul. So developing nations, old growth tropical rainforests still remain in many developed nations, and these nations are in the position the United States was once. They, first of all, they have this vast frontier that can help develop and use for income. So they can use this timber to develop their land and use it for income for the people of their land. Okay. It also, with the advances of technology, this has allowed these nations to exploit the resource much faster. You know, when we went through this, we were logging with axes and hand saws. Now we have these advanced machinery. They can blow through their forests much quicker than we ever could while we were going through it. So again, developing nations are in a tricky situation. What do? Do they use their resource or do they protect their resource for the long haul? So rainforest deforestation, especially in Brazil, produces more charcoal than any other nation. Both farm trees and rainforest trees are cut and burned to make charcoal, and about 350,000 Brazilian work in unhealthy, often exploitative conditions in this charcoal industry. So again, it's not always a benefit. Somebody is going to get a lot of money, and it's not always the people who deserve it. So hopefully this helps you out with lesson 2. If you have any questions, let me know.